give you the curse of true prophecy. Everything you say will be true, but no one will ever believe it. And so she was the one who said, I really don't think you should bring that wooden horse inside the city. And clearly that's a motif. Okay, the reason there's a mythical figure like that is because 3,000 years ago, human beings recognized that there were always people in their society who saw what was going to happen and warned about it, but it seemed so strange that nobody would listen to them. And so when we say, you know, it's easy for a scientist to say, okay, time for all the countries on the world to cooperate and not be enemies anymore. I mean, that's a typical scientific statement, right? Now, in the real world of social science, you know, all of our social science colleagues just go, what is wrong with you scientists? This is not going to happen. We have, you know, give us something we can work with. But we are rapidly approaching a point where if we don't do something, something's going to happen anyway. And the biggest issue, we have a focus group on sustainability in Kursig at the Institute for Advanced Study in Kursig. And there is an emerging sense that the most important element of sustainability now has nothing to do with growth or development. It has to do with survival. And 10, 15 years ago, nobody doing sustainability work was thinking about sustainability in terms of basic human survival. Now that's what we have to think about. We have to start with, what do we need in order to survive? Well, the reality is, in a highly technological, highly interconnected, highly globalized world economy, individual places, no individual place on this planet is self-sufficient. So we either cooperate globally, or we find networks of cooperators. We find networks of people that we can cooperate with. But countries that decide that it will not happen to them, as far as we're concerned, are dead. And sadly, that includes my country. Right now, NASA estimates that the drought that is beginning in North America will last until 2050. So that date keeps coming up, right? And by 2050, the United States will have lost between 35 and 65% of its food production. If it loses 35% of its food production, it ceases to exist as a global economic entity, because that's what the United States economic, all of its trade is based on food surplus. Plus, all the countries that rely on American food surpluses will be faced with severe food shortages. If it's more than 35%, the United States will be in a position where it will need to beg food from all the many friends it's been making for the last 30 or 40 years on this planet. This is not a good situation. The American national strategy for dealing with emerging diseases is, and I kid you not, it will never happen here. That's their plan. That's why they're denying that there's Zika in North America, even though there are Zika babies in 44 states out of 50. That's why they're denying, they're saying that Zika is a mosquito-transmitted disease, when it is primarily a sexually transmitted disease. They can also be transmitted by mosquitoes during the summertime. They're in denial, and it's going to kill them as a culture. They're in denial about disease, they're in denial about food production, they're in denial about sea level rises. The storm that devastated Houston, Texas last summer, that was a 7-meter sea level storm surge. That's equivalent to a 7-meter sea level rise, except it would be global and forever. 120,000 years ago, this planet had the same amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as it has now, and it was the same temperature as it is now. And sea levels were 7 meters higher than they are now. The specialists who work on sea level rise problems are really worried because they don't know why the big one hasn't happened yet. They don't know what the planet's waiting for. And the longer this goes, the warmer things get, the greater, without some big release, the greater the possibility that it's going to be a catastrophic change when it happens. And if this, if this is all happening at more or less the same time in the next 30 years, we really are not prepared to survive, which is terrible because we have all the ability to survive if we want to. I mean, all that technology in these cities that could be at risk is exactly the source of policies and programs that could enable us to survive. So mostly what I'm doing these days is just trying to beg humanity to save itself. Because, like I said, I have a daughter, I have some Hungarian stepsons, I got some American grandchildren, and I actually care about them. And in some strange abstract way, I would feel really bad if I lived long enough to see that before I died, things were going to be really bad for them. I would feel somehow responsible for that as a scientist. So evolutionary biology is really, really important, but nowadays there is no kind of basic biology, no kind of basic science that can be done without thinking about the consequences of global climate change and what we need to do about it. So I know I've dragged on long and I've made you, like I said, I was going to ruin your day, but hopefully for some of you, I will have helped, especially for graduate students. I've helped give you some ideas for how you might change your life and things that you might do to try to ensure your future. Thank you. So now everybody needs a drink. Or you're just, either a drink of vodka or a drink of hemlock.
Бачите, думки літають аудиторії, як і інститутом, прямо як вірус. І у нас питання впливу змін клімату на нашу країну і на людей піднімалось вже років 10 тому Леонідом Івановичем Францевичем. І дуже жаль, що його тут немає, тут було про що поговорити. Але, будь ласка, ваші питання. Anything clear? Саша.
And this is exactly right. Suppose we have, imagine a conservation biology project in which you want to reintroduce a species that has gone extinct in part of its range, and you're going to reintroduce it. How many programs for such reintroductions incorporate the likelihood that the reintroduction is going to increase the chances of disease? Nobody. Okay? Now, one of our good friends in Budapest, Gábor Fudvari, he works with ticks and tick-borne diseases, acarologist at the vet school. And Gábor, in Budapest, there's a big island in the middle of the Danube called Margaret Island. And it's a recreational area, there's sports clubs there are rock concerts there are tourism, it's a major tourism site, major recreational area for people. Gabor began looking at the ticks on the hedgehogs on Margaret Island. And he discovered that the abundance of ticks on hedgehogs on Margaret Island is 10 times higher than in the forests. And not only that, but all of those ticks are loaded with rickettsial pathogens. But there hadn't been any major disease outbreak on Margaret Island, even though there was this, the people were wandering in a soup of disease. Why not? Well, it turns out that most of the island, most of the public places, the grass is cut short. And so the ticks don't have tall enough grass to climb up on and wave for hosts. The only place they can do that is in the forested areas, the areas where there are trees, where they don't cut the grass. Okay? So if you don't go into that part of the park, you're never going to come into contact with a tick that could give you Rocky Mountain spotted fever or one of these other tick-borne diseases. But the government of Hungary had only 2 public toilets on Margaret Island because they were worried about people having sex in public toilets. Especially gay sex. They were so worried about that, there were only 2 public toilets on the entire island, and they were only open from 9 in the morning until 5 at night. And Gabor said, look, the reality is that gay sex in public bathrooms is a lot less of a problem than ruining your entire tourism industry because Budapest becomes known as a place where you can go into the park and die. So now there are public toilets all over the island. And it turns out, I mean, the government paid attention and understood that the immediate cost of putting extra public toilets out there was tiny compared to the cost of a major outbreak that could, you know, people getting sick during a rock concert, boom, nobody ever comes back. And that's a major part of their, I mean, tourism is a major part of Budapest's economy. That's a major part of Budapest's tourism industry. And so the government understood that this was something that would cost them a small amount of money now to make sure that they would never have to pay a huge price later. And it's the best example we know of this kind of thing. But the problem is that if that's true for ticks on hedgehogs on Margaret Island, it's true for every city on the planet that's trying to increase the green space in the city. I was in Brazil at the end of February, and I gave this talk, and 3 people came up to me just like this, and they said, we've been hired by Brazilian cities to design, to make them greener. And you're telling us this? I said, yep. And they said, well, that probably explains why São Paulo, which is a city of 20 million people, just closed all of its city parks because of yellow fever and malaria transmission. They've closed all of their city parks. So there's nothing we can do that doesn't have some, there's nothing we can do to try to make things better that doesn't also have potential costs. And this is another, really important evolutionary principle. Everything that happens in evolution has costs as well as benefits. And if we only think about the benefits, that's what's happened with biological control. Nobody ever anticipated that the biological control agent could be released in a new place and find a local host that it liked better than the target host. And it keeps happening over and over and over and over again. And we keep thinking, next time it'll be okay. Next time we have it figured out. But there's all this potential and green spaces in large cities for all of the benefits that they're going to provide, the ecosystem services, right? one of the ecosystem services is an increase in zoonotic disease potential. So actually what we should be doing is we should have no green spaces inside the central cities. We should have free mass transportation out to the periphery, and all of our green spaces should be out there. And we should make mass transit free to people to encourage them to go out and relax in a green space. But the more green spaces we intersperse in our cities, the more we're increasing the chances of zoonotic disease outbreak. And that's going to offset the extra oxygen the trees are producing.
More questions? Yeah.
May I ask, very impressive talk, but are there any recipes what country or government have to do? Because everything looks very scary. What we have to do? First step, second step, third step. Are there any programs elaborated how to mitigate all the situation? Like software, like it's not so.
Well, it's a two-part answer. Okay. The first part of the answer is that there's a very well articulated protocol, what we call the DAMA protocol. But the bad news is that it's not being implemented anywhere. And we're in this funny, what we call a catch-22 situation. So for example, Gabor and I and some other people were in Munich in April. We were going to try to apply, there's an EU program called a cost program, which is a grant. Basically, that's money that the EU would give EU people to build a network of researchers to then get the big money to do a program. So we were going to do this, get the money to bring together a network of researchers. And they do it this way because the initial money can only go to EU members, okay, all the people on the grant. But once the EU gives them the money, they can bring in people from anywhere in the world to be part of their network of specialists. Then you have a global network of specialists who will increase your chances of success with other grant proposals. And we wanted to do this with DAMA. And one of the people who was there is a guy from Norway who's part of the One Health network. You know, he's very highly placed in the One Health thing. And he said, look, this is wonderful, and this is exactly what we need to do, but I'm telling you right now that nobody who's going to review these proposals knows what the DAMA protocol is. And the reason nobody knows what the DAMA protocol is because the book that we wrote that was supposed to be published by now is not published. And the reason for that is because we submitted the manuscript last June, almost 1 year ago. A month later, the science editor at the University of Chicago Press left to become the director of the Princeton University Press. The University of Chicago Press took 10 months to hire a new science editor. And during that time, none of their science projects could be approved to go forward. So we were getting reviews saying, you've got to publish this now, you've got to publish this now, this is really important stuff, you know. So now it will come out sometime in 2019, and so the guy from Norway who was at this meeting in Munich said, there is no point in applying for this grant this year, it will not get funded because nobody knows what you're talking about. If the book is published next year and is out for 2 or 3 months before the deadline for the grant, then you can submit it next year, and then the reviewers will have some idea of what you're talking about. So this is a situation, we even talk about this in the book, about how bureaucracy is killing us. I mean, the problem with bureaucracies are wonderful as long as nothing changes. I mean, how many of you have gone to, some simple part of bureaucracy like the post office, or any kind of government bureaucracy, and you start to say, I've got a little bit of a problem. Instantly, the body language is like, so if you go in and say, here's the protocol, I followed the protocol, here it is, oh that's great, here's the receipt, blah, blah, blah. Bureaucracies are designed to be very rigid. That's the essence of their efficiency. So bureaucracies, and we are a bureaucratized species now. Bureaucracies are terrible at responding to changes. And that's this particular situation. The managing editor at the University of Chicago he does not understand why we're upset, because in his mind, they've done a really good job. We're a really important press, so we should take a long time to make sure we get exactly the right person. And we're going, if things are going to go terribly wrong within 30 years, you have just cost us 3% of the time that we have left. Doing your due diligence and making sure you got exactly the right person. And that's because if you're at the University of Chicago Press, all this climate change stuff is very abstract to you. Your life is fine. I mean, in fact, the winters are a little bit warmer in Chicago, so everything's good. You're not seeing any shortages in the grocery stores. So that's it. So yeah, we know exactly, this is the frustration. We know exactly what to do. And as soon as somebody decides, it's like we built a Ferrari, but we have no gasoline, right? As soon as somebody starts to pour gasoline into the tank, we had a workshop at Lake Balaton last October, and there was really broad agreement that this would work. This is how we do it. And it's a combination of working with local people in local villages and networking with specialists, science specialists, and policy people. Yeah. And I'll talk about this in Ascania. My talk in Ascania will be about that protocol. Because that's where you have to talk about it, is out in the local people.
Sasha, more questions? No?
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit like we're just expecting the last season of Game of Thrones. That's how your lecture sounds. We really are expecting what will be in the soon, and early or later, everybody will die. Is it correct?
Okay. Here's what I want. Okay. I want us to react to possibilities the same way your military does. The same way the United States military is the organization in the United States that spends more money on climate change data from the National Research Council than any other organization